So guys, what's going on? I hope you guys are well. Hope you guys are staying safe. I hope everything's good wherever you are. So guys, I want to talk a bit about Canelo Alvarez in the first part, and then talk a bit about Carl Froch. Guys, Chavez Sr. believes Canelo will, he believes Plant's a good fighter and Canelo Alvarez will beat him though. I think a lot of people have that opinion, and what I wanted to point out is that Chavez Sr. is right. I think Caleb Plant's not really getting the credit he deserves. A lot of you guys seem to write him off and saying he's rubbish and this, that, and the other. I would pump the brakes a little, to be honest with you. I don't agree with the way some of you guys seem to perceive Caleb Plant. I think Caleb Plant's a lot better than what some of you are giving him credit for. I do. I think Caleb Plant is a lot more... I think he's a lot better than what some of you think. And I think when you see him fight against Canelo, I think you'll appreciate him more. I do think he's better than Billy Joe. I've said it many times. I think he's longer. He's a bigger super middleweight. Christian pointed out that he's been sparring with heavyweights or cruiserweights. I don't think that's like... Listen, these guys that are super middleweights, they always spar with heavier guys. It's not something... And what that doesn't mean on fight night, if Canelo hits him with the right shot, that he's not going to be able to absorb it, or he could go down. Absolutely could go down. Canelo spars with heavyweights as well, so Canelo, it's not like Canelo's going to be deterred by Caleb Plant, even though Caleb Plant's bigger than Canelo. When you look at Caleb Plant's size, his body, his height, his reach, he's bigger. He's a bigger guy than Canelo. But Canelo's a stronger guy in terms of Canelo has punching power. Plant doesn't really have any punching power. So I think Caleb's obviously it's gonna be very difficult for Caleb to deter Canelo, and Christian made some points about, Caleb's got the height, reach, and he's going to keep him on the outside. I think it's a lot easier said than done. I think if it was that easy, a lot of fighters would be able to do it. And let's see. Listen, the fight's not a million miles away. It's around the corner. We'll find out whether he can keep Canelo off or whether he can do that, this, that, and the other. I don't think so. I don't think he can. I don't think he'll be able to, because I just think Canelo's... I just think Canelo will find a way and beat him. Canelo right now is going to take someone very special, very, very special. And I'm not sure Caleb Plant is that. As much as I rate Caleb Plant, and as you guys know, that I've been bigging Caleb Plant up, much as I rate Caleb Plant, I have to agree with Chavez Sr. that I believe I think I kind of agree. Caleb Plant's a good fighter, but Canelo will beat him. And that's the kind of opinion I have about this fight. Unfortunately, with some of you guys seem to think that Caleb is going to get destroyed and Caleb is not going to be able to compete. I disagree with that. I don't think that's the case. I don't think that's the case at all. I think Caleb is going to definitely put up a valiant effort. I just don't think anyone's good enough to beat Canelo Alvarez right now. Canelo is the best fighter in the world, easily. His resume, his career, and some people try to trash Canelo's resume and say it's a facade. I don't understand why people try to smash Canelo's resume when there's other guys with resumes that they think are going to give Canelo trouble that haven't got resumes. For example, Andrade is a guy that people think that are going to give Canelo trouble, but he hasn't got resume. He hasn't got a resume, so I just disagree. I just disagree with certain people giving their point across about, Canelo's avoiding that style. But the fact is, Canelo's fighting better competition than all of Charlo, Andrade, Golovkin. He's fighting better competition than all of those guys. And you know what? I'm going to talk about Andrade as well. I'm going to do a separate video about Demetrius Andrade. I think it's about time where we get these guys to step up. We need guys like Andrade to step up and fight. Because at the end of the day, when are they going to step up? When are they going to, step up to the plate? That's what we need Andrade to do, right? We need Andrade to step up to the plate. And unfortunately, Andrade at this point, you can say what you want, he wanted to make the fights, but they're not happening for him. So Canelo, on the other hand, Canelo is fighting the best competition. He's fighting the best competition, back to back to back. You know, he's fighting Caleb Plant now. You know, and the funny thing is that people say, well, oh, well, you know, Canelo's fighting these European guys. Okay, now he's fighting an American guy. So what's going to be the next thing if Canelo beats Caleb Plant? Oh, he needs to fight Andrade now, or he needs to fight Charlo. It's never ending. Then there'll be another guy. Oh, he needs to fight Edgar Berlanga. So this is what I've said before, that Canelo, there's always demand on Canelo, but there's not demand on these young kids that are not got the resume, that are not doing it like Canelo. Why isn't there demands put on them like it put on Canelo? Because surely they're fighters as well. They should be fighting people. It's not just Canelo. Canelo's not just the guy that, you know, that just, you know, they are just all waiting for Canelo to give them a shot. Well, when are they going to step up and get, you know, fight each other? And I don't want to hear excuses. Oh, well, he's ducking him. No. Well, it is what it is. You've got to find a way. If Andrade's struggling, right, to get a fight, then go up to 168. If you can't get a fight, then go up to 175. If Andrade is that good, let's see how good he is. You know, but at the end of the day, the problem is, here's the problem. That boxing, I think, with these young generations, the young generation coming through, all they want is, they want that big fight. They want that big fight. They're not willing to work their way to that big fight. They're not willing to put in that work in case they lose their O. Because since Floyd Mayweather, there's been a lot of emphasis put on people's O. You look at Caleb Plant, look at the last three guys that Canelo's fought that were champions. Billy Joe, Callum Smith, and Caleb Plant. Neither three of those guys had stellar resumes. Not the greatest resumes in terms of who they fought and how much in-depth resume. I'm going to go on to Carl Froch in a minute. And that's about resumes. You're not preparing yourself fighting somebody like Canelo. You're not preparing yourself. You're actually preparing yourself to fail against him, because Canelo's so experienced and his resume is so good. When you step up against Canelo Alvarez, you're in trouble. Because you haven't got that preparation, you haven't got the fights to give you the experience to go in to fight Canelo. See, if these guys fight each other, right, the winner of that fight will be in a great position to fight Canelo and potentially win, because now he's experienced against fighting other top fighters in around that division. That doesn't mean they're going to beat Canelo. But what it means is you're giving himself a better chance. They're better prepared for going into a fight with someone like Canelo. Because otherwise you're giving yourself no chance, right? Because Canelo's already got a great chance of beating you. By you not preparing yourself correctly, you're going to give yourself even less of a chance. So I think that's why some people like Caleb Plant, Billy Joe, firstly, they're not as good with Callum Smith. They're not as good as Canelo. But secondly, they're not even prepared really to fight Canelo, because they haven't even fought the best in their division yet. Forget about fighting the best of the best. We're not even talking about fighting the other top guys in their division. They haven't. And it's not always their fault. You know, promotional issues and the politics of boxing can get in the way. But that hampers their chance when they do step in with Canelo. But that's my point. I do agree with Chavez that I feel like Canelo will beat Plant. But I think Plant's a good fighter, no doubt about it. You know, so I do agree with Chavez. I want to come on to Carl Froch's comments. Carl Froch made some comments that, you know, his resume, or he was basically saying he feels that he doesn't get the recognition he deserves, and his record is better than, you know, David Haye, Amir Khan, Joe Calzaghe, Nassim Hamed, Nigel Benn, Chris Eubank, Steve Collins, and his resume is better than all of their resumes, and he doesn't get the credit. His record is all better. Firstly, I want to give my point of view. Joe Calzaghe is better than Carl Froch, and he's got a better resume than Carl Froch. I don't think there's any. Look, Joe Calzaghe fought a lot of guys that were past Chris Eubank, Roy Jones, Bernard Hopkins. They weren't in their prime. However, Carl Froch also beat fighters like that as well. You know, Kessler and what's his name, Jermaine Taylor were past their prime. So everyone fights fighters that were past their prime. You know. But Carl Froch, in terms of, apart from if we move Joe Calzaghe out of that list that he mentioned, I do think Carl Froch has got a point. I actually agree with Froch. The only other guy, and I mentioned this on Carl's show, that I actually think that the only other guy that could match Froch's resume is Khan in terms of how much in depth his resume was. If you look at the other guys, they may have had more significant wins, like Chris Eubank beat Nigel Benn beat Gerald McLennan. So they had more significant wins at high level, but I would say that the in-depth resume wasn't as good as Carl Froch's. So Carl Froch has got a very good point when he says that my resume is better than all of theirs. Like I said, I don't think he's a better fighter than all of those guys, but in terms of his record, he has got a point. There may be, like I said, you may be able to argue Khan might have had a better resume, but if you look at Naseem Hamed, David Haye, Chris Eubank, Nigel Benn, they don't have better resumes than Carl Froch. You know, when you look at the competition that Carl Froch... See, if you look at someone like Carl Froch's resume, you could reel the names off the world level names that he beat. The same with Amir Khan. You could reel off the names that Amir Khan beat. You couldn't do that with the others. Nigel Benn, you couldn't reel off the names that he beat at world level. Same with Chris Eubank. You couldn't reel off the names. They weren't like 6, 7, 8 names that you can just reel off like that. That also had very accomplished careers. That were great fighters in their own right, that had accomplished careers. You couldn't do that with them. David Haye, he had some good wins. You know, he beat John Mark Mormek. But even then, the depth of David Haye's resume isn't that great. You know, he beat Enzo Maccarinelli, but I still don't think his resume is in depth. You know, and he hasn't got the names that really pop out at you, like, you know, like a Froch's resume, like Abraham, Kessler, Butes. You know, he's George Groves, you know, all these guys, they pop out at you like, oh, he beat him. Same with Khan, Collazo, Ketelnik, Zab Judah, Paulie Malignaggi, Barrera, Chris Algieri, you know, Devin Alexander, Marcus Maidana. You know, all those names just pop out at you. You know, we know about those fighters. We know how good all of those guys you know about. All of those fighters you know about. And this is what I was saying earlier in the earlier part, that resume is very important in boxing. And here's what happens. When you've got guys like Joshua, Amir Khan, Carl Froch, the reason why these guys are probably not given the respect that they deserve is because all three guys fought very high-level competition throughout their careers. And when you fight high-level competition throughout your careers, you become underrated. You become underappreciated. You don't get the credit. There's more weaknesses. There's more vulnerabilities that come to the surface. You lose fights. You lose fights, and then you become underappreciated, you become underrated. But that's because they're fighting the best. You know, now there's a lot of guys in British boxing, some of the names that he mentioned there, that they had padded records. They didn't really fight the best. Like, they didn't really fight top tier competition back to back. Right? They didn't have an in-depth resume like Froch. So this is why I don't disagree with what Froch is saying. Do I believe he was better than all those fighters? He absolutely wasn't. Froch was an overachiever. He wasn't as gifted as probably any of those fighters. Maybe most of those fighters, he wasn't as gifted as them, but yet he managed to match their careers in terms of resume. And as you guys know, I'm very big on resume. Resume is everything, because resume for me tells you who you beat, how you beat them, you know, when you beat them. So Carl Froch has definitely got one of the most impressive British resumes, in my opinion. If you were to do a top 5 British resume, Carl Froch would be in that, without question. If you were to look at Carl Froch's resume, he would be in the top 5 in terms of the amount of top fighters he beat, without question. You know, so I do think he's not given the recognition, but I think a lot of the reason he's not given the recognition is probably because of the fact that people don't really like him. His personality is not the greatest. So he comes across bitter, he comes across as somebody that, you know, the public dislike. But I always, like, I'm not a big fan of Carl Froch, but the thing is, I distinguish the way I feel about Carl Froch and his boxing career, because his boxing career was stellar and his resume is great. I don't think anyone can deny that his boxing resume, when he says that, like I said, I think I do agree. Like, I generally say that the only guy on that list that he mentioned that can match Carl Froch's in-depth resume is Khan. That's it. I don't think anybody else has an in-depth resume, like a resume that's stacked with so many top fighters like Carl Froch. Like, there's guys on there that had a better win. Ricky Hatton beat Costa Tszyu, who was a great fighter, but Costa Tszyu was at the end of his career. Nigel Benn beat Gerald McLennan, which was a great win, right? That was a much better win than anything Froch did. Chris Eubank beat Nigel Benn. That was a better win than anything Froch did. But the fact of the matter is they don't have an in-depth. Nazim Hamed beat Kevin Kelly. But again, his resume, if you look at the other guys, a lot of the guys that he beat, they weren't as good as some of the names that Froch had and in-depth as Froch had. So I do agree with Froch. I think Froch has... he definitely makes some valid points. Does Froch get the credit? Absolutely not. But the fact of the matter is, I think the fact that he's come out and said this, I think that doesn't go down because it comes across as arrogant. But he probably feels he doesn't get the credit. He feels that he doesn't get the recognition, so he's making it known. I do think a lot of those fighters that he mentioned, especially the ones in the recent times, like you got your Hatton, Carnes, and Hayes, I think they were much bigger names than Froch. They had a much bigger profile. They made a lot more money, especially in the early parts of their careers. They were promoted like stars, whereas Froch wasn't. Froch came up the hard way. Froch didn't get the publicity, the fame, only towards the back end of his career. But if you look at the early part of Froch's career, he didn't really get the recognition. And that's where I think a lot of his bitterness came, But towards the back end of his career, he became all right because he realized that now he started getting the recognition. But I just feel like, for me, I think Carl Froch was a good fighter. Like I said, stellar resume. But I do think he thinks he's a lot better than what he is. Is he as good as what he thinks? I'm not sure. But I think he definitely has a point. He doesn't get the recognition. But I don't think that's to do with what he did in the ring. I think that's probably some of the stuff that he does out. And the fact that he comes across sometimes as like a wind-up guy that's winding up people. But in terms of his resume, yeah, you have to give him credit. Even though I might not be the biggest fan of his, but you have to give him credit. He has got a great resume. Would he have beaten Calzaghe? And absolutely not. But he definitely has a very good resume. He definitely has a resume to be proud of. Because like I said, if I was to do a top 5 list of British fighters with the best resume, Froch would probably be in there. Now, that doesn't mean that I think he's top 5 in terms of the greatest British fighters. No, but he definitely has a great resume. And if I was to do a top 5 of British fighters with the best resume, Froch probably goes in there. So I think I agree with Froch, even though I don't always agree with Carl Froch, but I actually think he's made some very, very strong points there, and I think he's correct. Apart from Calzaghe, who I believe he was undefeated, and he beat a lot of good fighters as well. Now, he might not have beaten, even his resume might not be as in-depth as Froch, but again, like, I know Carl Froch talks about he beat past his prime Eubank, Roy Jones, Bernard Hopkins, and a lot of people thought Bernard beat Calzaghe. The fact of the matter is that Calzaghe beat those guys, and yeah, they might have not been past their best, but Carl Froch also beat guys which he admits in Kessler and Jermaine Taylor, which were past their best. So I think we can look at it. No one's going to beat guys in their prime. Like Canelo gets that. Oh, well, he beat Miguel Cotto past his prime. He beat him, Shane Mosley past him. You're never gonna fight people in their prime all the time. It's not possible for you to fight people in their prime all the time because, people came around before you, some people came after you. Calzaghe was at the stage of his career when Froch wanted to fight him. Calzaghe was at the end. So Froch, he didn't think there was any reason to fight Carl Froch. He was finishing off, and it was a bit like a situation where, why do I really need this guy? It's like Carl Froch not fighting James DeGale. Carl Froch thought, why do I need to fight this guy? What do I have to gain? So Carl Froch did the same thing to James DeGale. When James DeGale became his mandatory, people wanted to see that fight. People thought that James DeGale had a style to beat Froch. But James DeGale didn't want to fight James DeGale. So the same way Calzaghe didn't want to fight Carl Froch because he didn't really think that, what do I gain? So that's my take on it. What do you guys think? Leave your thoughts in the comment section below. Let me know what you think. I'd love to know your opinions. I'd love to know what you think about Carl Froch's comments. I'd love to know what you think about Canelo and Chavez and Plant and what you think about that. I'd love to know all of your guys' opinions. Guys, I will be looking to do a live stream tomorrow, hopefully, and we'll talk about this in more depth. we'll talk about this in a lot more detail. But leave your thoughts, guys. Let me know what you're thinking, guys. Remember to please like, share, subscribe to my channel. I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.